Hello everyone, the Skilled Roy here, back with another Legends of Runeterra custom cards video. As you all know, Contest 5 has been out for quite a while now, and after a period of time, I am finally back to finish it. I do want to say I am terribly sorry for taking so long to do this. With a variety of other news to get ahead of, work, and me honestly needing some time to myself, unfortunately I took simply way too long. I do want to apologize profusely for that, and I'll be taking some steps to ensure that future ones do not take as long. But we'll see how things go. So, without further ado, let's get to the entries. The first keyword used was Gnarly. Gnarly is when you have no remaining mana. This is entry number 1. The designer had this to say. Out of all the keywords, Gnarly seemed to me like it had the most potential. Sonic was the first card I made with Gnarly as a way of trying it out. Sonic can do a whopping 8 damage if the stars align, but can easily be answered with any ping. Also, if you don't have the capacity to become Gnarly, he's just a worse Senna. All in all, it's just a simple aggro card to help me get in a Gnarly mindset. Fun Police was a ton of fun to make. I was brainstorming when I thought, why does Gnarly have to only be about you? Why can't both players be Gnarly? Taking inspiration from Stony Suppressor and Phantom Prankster, I thought I'd make a card that wouldn't just affect how you spent your mana, but your opponent as well. Also, the intended interactions that it would activate if you became Gnarly by playing it, meaning it is also a 4 mana 3/5 when it's played on curve. Finally, we have Belt Boy. He's a little subpar normally, lacking a keyword when compared to Rune Runner or having the same amount of stats, but he makes up for it with his no scopes. The no scopes start out pretty bad, 2 mana for 1 unit damage, but they slowly become more and more cool the more you use them to become Gnarly, eventually completely obliterating a unit. It costs a bit of mana to get there, but no scopes aren't totally useless either, as they can make some decent combat tricks. The next entry is entry number 6. Here's what the designer had to say. These cards are meant to complement the other Gnarly cards by providing a light counterbalance to their lower stat lines, especially on the Bilgewater side card of things. Thieving Seagull is a 1/1 for 1 that will nab 1 if you're Gnarly when it's summoned. It is meant to be a cheap chump blocker with a conditional nab effect based on Gnarly. Nab may be a controversial keyword, but it's an annoying seagull. What did you expect? Hot Dog Stand is a 3-cost landmark that will summon a Thieving Seagull when you spend spell mana. It is meant to be more attune support in the Gnarly game plan. You attune, play a 1-cost spell, and you gain a chump blocker and probably nab a card. It should probably pair well with Sharkfin Thrill Chaser, allowing you to possibly nab 2 cards. Hot Dog Stand also allows for making some burst speed blockers. Lastly is Old Grouch. This card was a struggle to make. He offers a lot of interactivity. You can exploit Attune again to purposely fill your opponent's hand with Thieving Seagulls, but your opponent has a chance to return the favor by giving you seagulls and nabbing cards from your deck. Challenger also allows you to deal with elusive blockers, who at the moment are a problem for Sharkfin Thrill Chaser and Tubular Wave Carver. The next keyword is Specialist. The first time I gain a keyword, except Barrier, I gain it permanently on all copies of me. Afterwards, I can't be given or granted any other keywords except Barrier, but I'm given or granted +2/+2 instead. The next entry is entry number 2. Here's what the designer had to say. When looking through the options given to me, excluding the popular keywords, Specialist was a pretty creative keyword that caught my eye amidst all the other entries. It capitalized on keyword buffs that is pretty abundant in Demacia and especially in Targon. Though the original cards don't feel as they brought out the full potential of the keyword, so I decided to add supporting cards to the archetype. Twilight Herald is a finisher that constantly empowers the specialist with keywords and can be used to grant temporary keyword buffs permanently. Weapon is a specialist that doesn't need to be targeted and can scale quite well with the right side of buffs. And Preparation is a dual choice keyword that can be used defensively or offensively and really bring out potential in some of the cards, especially specialists. The next keyword is Wanted. When I'm killed, create coins in my opponent's hand equal to my cost. And coins are 0 mana burst speed spells. Coins stack. Remove 2 coins to reduce the cost of a spell in hand by 1, or remove 4 coins to draw 1. The first entry is entry number 3. Here's what the designer had to say. The cards were designed as a base assuming the previous set is canon. The goal is to make a viable Wanted archetype combining Wanted units and cards that give enemy Wanted. Coin Stealer creates 3 coins instead of 2 or 4 is to make her less of a value card because 3 is an odd number and 1 will be unusable coin left in your hand to get the coin for other means. The other 2 cards are designed to be the payoff card for the Wanted archetype, and there aren't really much to explain. Hope you enjoy. The next entry is entry number 15. Here's what the designer had to say. I love the coin mechanic that Wanted gave us, but I feel like there could be other ways of earning them. Meet the Small Time Goon, a dual region unit that gives you a coin every round start. It might be risky hiring a Wanted man, but keep him alive and he'll be able to pay his own weight in gold. 4 health should be difficult enough to kill him on turn 2 in order for him to survive 2 turns. At that point, after the opponent kills him, your deck should be more suited to use those coins even if you got the same amount as your opponent. And now, based on the balance of pocket aces, please accept this blackmail. A 2 mana burst speed spell for P&Z that grants a unit a small stat buff and Wanted. It offers great flexibility, either letting you take better trades while giving your opponent some coins, or bluffing an enemy unit in order to get some coins yourself. It was made since I felt like it could be a neat card that directly applies Wanted to a unit, since the current card pool of cards that could do that was a little restrictive. It was made as merely a P&Z spell, as I imagine it could be pretty hard to blackmail someone in Bilgewater, considering is lawless and all that. Lastly, the cards we got for Wanted in Contest 4, while they were great, they didn't really offer a way to win or generally just deal damage to the enemy nexus, something that both P&Z and Bilgewater both love to do. Feast your eyes on the Hired Sharpshooter, a professional sniper that will offer their expertise for a little coin. When allies attack, he'll discard up to 5 coins in your hand to deal that much damage directly to the enemy nexus. Even though they're practically outcost by almost all other 5-cost units, if you can pay them enough, they will absolutely make it worth your while. I made this card as a finisher for decks that utilize the Wanted keyword, but I didn't want it to be too strong without actually using the payoff for Wanted, hence the relatively weak stat line. I originally had them be able to discard all coins in your hand, but decided against it since gaining coins is probably easier than I imagined, especially with all the other coins I made. I also want to be absolutely clear that the Hired Sharpshooter's abilities is a skill, and even without the skill marker, it allows the same design pattern as Misfortune does. The next keyword is Tune. When you cast a spell, trigger my Tune effect of equal power to the cost of the spell cast. The next entry is entry number 4. Here's what the designer had to say. I am using Submission 16's Tune keyword. Something I wanted to change from the original was the fact that Tune effects happened instantly. That's not to say it's a bad design, but when making Copper City Conductor, I wanted to be followed by a band of singers. It would be real annoying just to spam burst spells from 6+ in order to instantly summon and buff and then attack with everyone. The action of getting the skill going onto spell list doesn't immediately turn to your opponent's side. Instead, when you pass your turn to continue the round from then on, all the spell effects will go up at the same time the next time your round starts again. This means that even with the skill active, you can attack. Also, for the whole set, I was mostly focused on trying to buff up 6+ spell cost theme. Not all cards here really do that, but in general, it's there. With Copper City Conductor, their value possibility is certainly through the roof. However, you first need to play a 6+ cost spell, which, if desired immediately, would cost 10 mana for him and the spell, a huge cost for 2 units. In order to break even with value from the mana spent, excluding what the spell actually does, you need to cast 3 6+ cost spells. This is quite a big investment, but it's still quite strong after the fact when you get massive buffing values, so long as your deck is designed around the board space. Tough to balance, but I think this card could find its place somewhere. Spunk Funk Strategist was a new take on Assembly Bot. Instead of buffing itself, it keeps allies who are weak alive. This does wonders when you need to give your Funsmith some extra health. The reason it does half the spell cost is because it's both an incentive to play as many 1 to 3 cost spells as they get more benefit over the even ones, but also because you can get a big burst of value after already playing a big expensive spell, such as Judgment or Progress Day. He has some weak stats at first, of course. He's certainly more a wild card option from going from wide to tall board states. Lastly is Luminous Shift. I always tried to challenge myself to do more than just make crazy champions and epic cards with really basic things even a first-time player can understand. This card is my first crack at a focus card for Demacia. Fast like Targon's Blessing, but not as flexible. Keeps important units alive before enemy spells are cast. For allies with Tune, this means an extra trigger, and not just one. The spell works very well with both cards in this set. The next keyword is Tranquil. A Tranquil unit triggers its Tranquil effect at the round's end as long as it has not been attacked or been targeted by an enemy spell or ability. The next entry is entry number 5. Here's what the designer had to say. The idea of Tranquil was a really cool one to me. I too really enjoy the concept of a sleeping beast, and I think it has a lot of potential. Awaken. I wanted an easy way for the person with Tranquil cards to end their own tranquility since spells you cast don't affect tranquility. I thought challenging an enemy with an attack would be a good way to do it. However, since a lot of Tranquil cards have quite big numbers, I decided that frostbiting it and targeting the weakest enemy so that they probably won't be killed was a good way to go about it. There's a downside that frostbiting your own unit is leaving it vulnerable, but it does provide a good way to end your own tranquility, which is useful. Summary, a slightly risky way to end your own tranquility. Next is Petrocyte Goliath. When thinking on enormous beasts that gain power over time and are from Demacia, the idea of Petrocyte came to mind easily. Instead of giving power to itself, it gives it to his allies and releases a stun once its tranquility ends. It provides some additional utility missing from the other Tranquil cards, and while it doesn't give ridiculous stats, it can still be pretty powerful if left to charge through stunning more powerful enemies. Summary, buffs allies to stun based on how buff they become. And lastly is Blue Sentinel. I thought that Tranquil could use some lower power drops. This card's abilities are rooted in flavor, but it gives mana to an archetype that already has a ton of big drops without being too broken, as it requires you to have mana stored up, which also mirrors the theme of charging up power and then releasing it in one burst. Summary, a low power drop that wants you to give up spell mana for a big drop. The next entry is entry 13. Here's what the designer had to say. I chose a Tranquil keyword for this contest because I thought it had potential to include some cool abilities into the game while giving opponents counterplay options, which I love. I also enjoyed the original's expensive creatures you should leave alone theme, but I wanted to play with other ways to approach the keyword. I do want to state that this keyword has a ton of potential in Ionia, but for this contest, I'm making cards for Demacia and Freljord, which I still thoroughly enjoyed doing. The Swole Tavern Keeper is a big, tough guy passing around drinks and keeping spirits high, but if you insist that he and his guests can't enjoy their drinks in peace, he'll show you why that was a bad decision on your part. This concept began when I really wanted to make a low/medium cost card that transforms from a defensive to aggressive when his tranquility ability has been broken. I also saw so much potential for this card in both flavor and mechanics. This card's heal is less than Kindly Tavern Keeper, but affects your whole board and can continue to get value if he remains tranquil. You or your opponent can choose to intervene and turn off the heals, instead creating a much more threatening board presence. But of course, most importantly, now Swole Squirrel has a lifting buddy. Continuing with Freljord Inn themed cards, the Tipsy Owl is one of the first cards I really wanted to make. I love the idea of creating an inn landmark that allows your units to get a rest. Because the tranquil effect is given by the landmark itself, and because usually in Runeterra you only attack every other round, this effect can actually be pretty easy and to consistently trigger, so as long as your opponent doesn't decide to intervene or forces your hand in some way. Fun fact, the Tipsy Owl is the inn all the in-game cards, see what I did there, are from. Finally, my expensive Demacia card. I got the idea out of this after Towering Stonehorn was released, and after seeing that there were creatures in these Petrocite woodlands that were less affected by magic. I knew I wanted to make a big effect with a small body for the cost, and therefore be challenging to pull off. But if you manage to use this card successfully, you can just shut down some strategies in the game. I knew it couldn't make it negate spells, so I limited it to 5 or less, which allows it to be countered by some of the expensive spells, but also allows it to be played with the Mage Seeker / big spell package in Demacia. While the effect is powerful, I think it's fair since almost every deck can answer this card if played intelligently. Finally, I enjoyed how this card interacts with Stony Suppressor, where it makes some spells playable that would not have been otherwise. The next keyword is Flicker. Remove a unit from play and then instantly resummon them. The next entry is entry number 7. Here's what the designer had to say. I really love the idea of Flicker, but its cards didn't deliver on what the keyword had promised. First, I decided to redefine Flicker, as a previous definition left an area of ambiguity as to what resummon means. The cards themselves are meant to portray the 3 ways that Flicker could be used if it was implemented, in my opinion: protection, pseudo removal, and for summon triggers. Wild Magic Surge is my interpretation of what the flavor of the original keyword was trying to convey. I decided that the first half of the effect wasn't quite impactful enough for that it is a name giving for an entire archetype. I went back and forth on possible secondary effects, but settled on ephemeral as a keyword, as the idea of impermanence works with wild magic as a concept. The unnamed Siege Machine is a Noxian follower that gives Flicker / unit summon archetype a payoff for summoning a lot of units that may or may not stick around, as opposed to crowd favorite who needs to see the units on board. I was unsure how to balance cost and the base stats, but decided it should aim towards the weaker side, considering it would come with an entire package of Swarm and Flicker's cards to support its playstyle. And then last but not least, Defensive Combat Training is a powerful protective tool which not only allows you to essentially lock your opponent out of removal for a round, but also allows you to re-trigger summon effects and heal up your units. Similar to Lamb's Respite, however, as its high potential comes around the cost of speed, essentially allowing your opponent to just wait with their removal until the next round. The next entry for Flicker is entry number 11. Here's what the designer had to say. Keeping Flicker to Ionia and Noxus was quite challenging, as there's many ideas that I had that didn't fit those 2 regions. In the end, with only 3 cards to work with, I focused on creating Noxian cards in order to explore an intricate mechanic in an otherwise simple region. Impudent Imp was designed with the premise of what if buffs were kept when the target is flickered. Noxus in particular allows for some interesting interactions with this card, such as gaining +3/+3 and Challenger from Brutal Hunter, and then renewing her quick attack. A more spicy example would be taking crowd favorite stats plus Overwhelm, and then summoning a potentially even bigger one, the Spirit Gate. Similar to Vault of Helia, this card proposes a deck building challenge for using Flicker to summon units that cost 1 more than the Flicker target. Impudent Imp particularly synergized with this card, flickering an ally to inherit its stats and keyword, and then replacing them with a stronger unit. And then lastly, Realm Spinner. Realm Spinner capitalizes on the many powerful when I'm summoned effects that are associated with both spiders and fearsome decks, such as Frenzied Skitterer, Crowd Favorite, Mist Wraith, and Arachnoid Host. It's simply designed to use Flicker to play towards Noxus' strengths. The next keyword is Augured. A card is augured when it is affected while in hand or in deck. The next entry is entry number 8. Here's what the designer had to say. I loved how Augured tied the 2 nature-heavy regions of the game together very nicely, and I felt the set could be a lot more rounded out with just a few more additions. Soul Speakers channels the RNG of Elnux and provides a faster payoff with Freljord deck buffs. You normally have to wait to draw augured units after, for example a Tusk Raider Plunder, but Soul Speaker can get those buffs before needing to draw the units, while also providing a very loose tutor. Night Eyes uses the fact that the cost reduction also counts as a card being augured, and plays into the tempo mechanics of Ionia by offering a chance for solid investment into a huge hand discount. Finally, a dual region follower, Spirit of the Great Wild, is my attempt to round out the augured submission. Uniting hand buffs, deck buffs, and tempo, it provides an excellent source of value, but also requires you to have the upper hand in terms of units to make full use of its value generation. Thank you for listening to my ideas. Go hug a tree, everybody, and don't forget to reduce, reuse, and recycle. The next keyword is Despair. When a unit dies, gives me +1/+1 this round. The first entry is entry 9. Here's what the designer had to say. When designing these cards, I started from the angle of looking into what Despair set was missing. The first thing I analyzed was missing a supply of units to die, triggering the Despair growth, so to fill that niche, I designed a Shadow Isles value unit in the Maynard Vanguard, and used Despair to make the follower he creates dependent on how many deaths he's seen to be buffed by. This also allowed me a higher health stat for his cost, giving room for Despair to heal him up after blocking key strikes. Next, I looked into the mid game, where Shadow Isles and Demacia both rely on powerful strikes. Theorizing from the ideas of vengeance and how Demacians might see the Callista Pledge, I created a spell that empowers an ally with the last swing at a tyrant during their final breath. The doubling power mechanic, like Redoubled Valor and Swole Squirrel, will grant permanent buffs based on the temporary buffs, so a unit that's been temporary huge with Despair is a good target for it. Mourner of Fossbarrow is the last card I started designing, a simpler early cost unit for Despair decks that's inspired by the story of Nocturne's actions in Demacia. I wanted to give an incentive for playing it after combat that reflected the existing cards Vanguard Redeemer and Radiant Guardian, but a bit more selfish. So Fearsome, which currently exists in the region on Cithri the Bold, seemed like an appropriate aggressive reward for an already region-relevant trigger. Each of the cards was designed to value ally and enemy deaths, making them most valuable in decks that want to trade or sacrifice allies for position, and this is about cementing what I see Despair's role in Demacia and Shadow Isles midrange. The next entry is entry number 10. Here's what the designer had to say. I wanted to make cards that used Despair's mechanic in a way that was more fast-paced than the original cards. While I wanted to make early game Despair cards, I was hoping to make Despair cards that weren't just falling up on a Bark Beast, Curse Keeper, Butcher to make an even stronger God Hand. Instead, I wanted to make some interesting back and forth with some planning ahead and interactivity on both sides. To do this, I leaned into the concept of round start so that you have a prep a turn ahead before you attack with a mix of ephemerals on the left and Despairs on the right. Sorrow of the Isles. I kind of just wanted to make a cute card that interacted with Despair in a simple way. I decided to make it focus because I realized if it was burst, you could totally use it on Hecarim and have an easily attack with the +15/+15 for 1 mana. Grave Nester. The goal here was to make a Despair card with some sort of self-sustaining way to upgrade it for a tiny bit. I think this captures the idea of Despair cards pretty well. They should be weak statted but can have extreme power turns when stuff dies. This card can generate tokens and requires some planning ahead so your opponent gets to tap under a ping, or if they try to ping it, you have a Glimpse Beyond or some other way to rise it up enough. Possessive Banshee. This is a sort of spin-off of Undying where your goal is to make it self-sustaining. If you're able to pull off a kill with Possessive Banshee, you get to have another card. However, Possessive Banshee is only really strong on attack turns, so you need to make sure you have some way of killing off the possessed vessel on a defensive turn. The next entry is entry 17. Here's what the designer had to say. For contest number 5, I picked Despair. At first glance, it felt relatively straightforward, but it's actually quite fitting for Shadow Isles as it's an open-ended design for a variety of cards. I believe all keywords should remain flexible enough to adapt across regions and playstyles. A unit with Despair resembles a mini Nasus, or They Who Endure, in that units dying increase their stats. The main difference would be that keyword only activates when the card is on the field and only lasts that round. The original entry focused mainly on interesting methods of passing Despair to units and using Despair for more potentially stat buffs. For my cards, I want to try another approach and use Despair's stat gains as an engine to aid in other abilities. For my first card, we have Bone Collector. He's an obsessive beast of a creature always looking to add to his collection. The Collector is a board wipe unit that depends on his power. Despair is the built-in tool to help him adjust this, and of course, you also play around with other buff options. The Devourer of Dreams is an understated unit that gets more and more value as he gains stat points. Combat tricks that time Despair procs can result in huge Nexus damage or huge lifesteal. And then lastly, the Warrior's Husk is a mid-range tank. The warrior will keep on fighting until he meets his match in battle, and he grows in strength with every foe that falls before him. The next entry is entry 19. Here's what the designer had to say. The general idea of this set was to expand on the Despair set in a unique way, both gameplay-wise and flavorfully, and bring in some interesting tools to it that doesn't already have to allow some creative plays, and generally explore other ways this keyword could be used outside of the way that the original Despair set used it. I initially intended to bridge the Despair and Kindred sets using this one, but couldn't come with anything interesting within the card limit. I initially wanted to use this set to add some more mana-related mechanics to the Isles as well, and I thought I could do it interestingly, and I was thinking of doing the same with rally mechanics, but I decided to go a completely different route while expanding on both Kindred and Despair archetype in an interesting way. Another thing I was planning on doing was hybrid cards, making use of a single region allegiance, but again, I decided against it. Enforced Positivity was planned to be a spell created by Slave to Hope, more about cleansing Despair from allies, killing allies with Despair, or gaining benefits from allies despairing. It would have been a fun opportunity to use Despair as a verb as well. Also, I just want to hear Roy say Kibo or Zetsubo. There, are you happy? Okay. The next keyword is Defend. Effects with the Defend keyword will trigger immediately when a block is committed. Defend effects are resolved from left to right at the same time support effects. The next entry is entry number 14. The designer had this to say. Design goal. Showcase various applications of Defend keyword that fit within LOR's philosophy of encouraging dynamic gameplay. The Unruly demonstrates Defend as a debuff. Defend can be used to trigger as a debuff, causing your opponent to think twice about whether to block with their unit. In this example, the debuff lets your quick attack unit safely attack against a higher health unit, encouraging both parties to attack. The Unforgiving demonstrates Defend as a condition. Defend can also encourage you to take a risk by entering combat to block as a condition to gain a benefit later. In this example, the unit has no immediate benefit by blocking and exposes itself to counterplay from your opponent, but is provided a buff on its attack next round. The Underhanded demonstrates Defend as an option for your opponent. Finally, Defend can give you or your opponent more lines of play. When you challenge a unit with Defend, you force its Defend effect to trigger. In this example, your opponent can choose to challenge Mao with one of their units to hit your Nexus uncontested, but Mao will also hit the unit unit for free. If your opponent gets greedy, they'll run out of cards, but you can heal your Nexus back up. The next entry is entry number 20. Here's what the designer had to say. Defend is an interesting keyword conceptually. While there's a risk of having it discouraging attacking if it's a pure benefit, there are ways around this that can lead to some of the keyword enabling interesting interactions and plays. I went with 3 angles for these cards. One of them is usually a downside, but it doesn't discourage blocking entirely. Another is a benefit that when you do even trade with it, but poor when chump blocking, making you think of how to trade in a different way. Another is entirely beneficial to block with, but the ephemeral keyword usually discourages you to play on attacking turns, so it adds to an interesting dynamic. It also gives your opponent an interesting decision of stopping an attack to deny the value from its given a defend effect, or going for an attack anyways. The next keyword is Inspire. Whenever you declare an attack with a single unit, all Inspire effects activate. The next entry is entry number 16. The designer had this to say. This is a super last minute submission, so please bear with me. I made my cards around the keyword Inspired, a really neat concept that didn't feel met its potential. As the wording's a tad ambiguous, I took Inspired to mean that if it triggers whenever another ally attacks on their own, meaning an Inspired card which wouldn't trigger off itself, and design my cards accordingly. Inspired Soldier is a 2-mana 3/2 pseudo challenger that allows you to cheat Inspire triggers condition. And an important thing to note is that Inspire triggers before the attack effects, so if you solo attack with a support unit like Shen, Inspired Soldier would challenge the strongest enemy, then gain the supported effect. Royal Bodyguard was designed this way as a way to protect units that attack by themselves. Royal Bodyguard could even be used to protect small scout units and then swap places with smaller challengers, or even as a way to protect units with strong attack effects such as Broom Crew Rookie. Legion Berserker is simply another way to trigger Inspire easily, but could have been used in tandem with units like seeing allies attack, such as Misfortune. The next keyword is Root. Rooted cards can't be played from hand. The next entry is entry number 18. Here's what the designer had to say. I loved Root as a keyword the moment I saw it, and I felt it opened the gates to some incredibly creative and interesting designs that could bend the rules of the game in interesting ways. While the original set focused mostly on the synergy package, keeping the designs fairly low-key, I've tried to stretch the boundaries of the keyword with the hope of making designs that are both unique and lead to interesting and enjoyable skill-testing gameplay for both players. Cargo Inspector is a 2-mana 2/2, which sacrifices some of its stats for a flexible effect, rooting all cards of a specific cost in both hands. It can be used to prevent a specific card to be played this round, use its reveal to inspect the enemy hand for specific cards, or just to an attempt to root as many cards as possible to advance root-related synergies. This flexibility provides another layer of skill testing, especially in higher tiers of play, where inherent randomness that comes from your hand keeps it from being too consistent on earlier turns. Dockside Mugger is a 6-mana 4/4 Overwhelm that roots cards you can afford in hand and gains stats based on their number. It can be any kind of They Who Endure for root decks, but also advances root synergies that can potentially grow to scary sizes, as is limited immensely by the size and contents of your hand, your remaining mana, and the fact that it locks you out of all plays for the remainder of the round. Finally, Captain Moray is a magnum opus for the package, a 2-mana 4/4 with an effect that roots the entire enemy hand. It's rooted itself until you've discarded or rooted 12 or more cards this game, which mainly serves to provide a deck building cost to the card and lock it out of the early turns, which allows me to give it more late game appropriate stat line. It is otherwise a flexible finisher, meant to combo into a game finishing move that your opponent cannot counter. While its effect is strong, I believe it's reasonably less broken than the imagined ones at the start. It can be countered both by stop effects and the unit enemies playing their burst and fast speed spells on time. Additionally, it is hurt by both being a setup dependent finisher and also dependent on other cards to fully make use of its value, which are both big downsides in turns where certain decks can win the game with only a single card. These cards were a lot of fun to create, and simply thinking about theoretical gameplay patterns makes me believe they'd be, in truth, a great addition to the game. The last keyword is Lone. If this unit is the only card from its region, then activate this effect on summon. The last entry is entry 21. Here's what the designer had to say. I picked this keyword because it's undefinable. However, due to its restricted confines and design space as the opposite of Allegiance, I thought it would bring a challenge to me, allowing me to grow as a card designer through exploring a new scope of design. While trying to brainstorm around Noxus Ionia regions, I ought to attempt allowing Overwhelm to explore outside of its native regions, being accessible to all regions without being too oppressive. As a lone unit, I thought it would allow Fort Breacher to act as a finisher, as it summons 2 weak units which take any damage it takes, regardless of the spells or struck, are dealt to its Nexus 2. Following Deep Mechanic, I tried to pan my design towards being as engines which pulls out or tutor specific cards to allow proccing Lone by eliminating other cards from its region while using them reactively. Vlongo Spurt allowed drawing multiple 5+ power units, which allows you to insert more of Noxus cards into your deck during deck building without feeling constrained, as you can remove other Noxus units as you draw them. Then playing lone units at later rounds when other cards from that region are removed. TLDR, I see art, I make cards. Okay, and that's it. So if you want to vote, please go ahead and vote using the Google form in the description of this video. I'll have voting up for a week, and then we will talk about the results. And obviously, with that, it is finally done. Again, my sincerest apologies to everyone. There's been a bunch of excuses, obviously, for not getting this done on time, but honestly, none of them go really as far into explaining things that I would like. I'll do my best to ensure this never happens again, and thank you, as always, for being patient with me. I will will see you all next time. Thank you, and peace out.
Hey there everyone, this is Midrush. You're probably wondering, who is this guy? Well, I'll tell you who I am. I'm the editor for this video. A good friend Roy needed a little bit of help working on videos because he has a lot of other projects to be working on top of his job, so he called out for some help with editing and I volunteered. So if you see the quality of the video change every now and then, it's probably because I went a little hard on it, because I just love to push myself a lot anytime I'm editing, and it makes me take a lot more time on a project than it needs to, so keep that in mind. No wonder these take me so long, because I'm very detail oriented when it comes to editing. Of course, I can only do these in my spare time because I have a job and I have all kinds of other responsibilities in my life. So I'm not sure how many of these you'll see from me, and I'm very thankful to Roy for allowing me to help him out. If you want to follow me on Twitter, I have a Twitter link below. Do keep in mind, I am a huge artist supporter, and some of the stuff that I share is kind of suggestive. So if you're under the age of 16, or even if you're under the age of 18, I'd highly advise against following me. So please keep that in mind. So with that, I'll see you guys later. Peace out.